All right, well, welcome everyone to the Delta Dental Green Room. My name is April Schmaltz, and I am the interim co-CEO at Delta Dental. We started the Green Room in 2020 as a conversation series to help business leaders gain insights for managing, motivating, and achieving continued success for their business and their employees. And today's topic on workforce trends and strategies is one that I know is top of mind for many business leaders. Our discussion today is designed to spur new ideas and how you can think differently about your own workforce. My guest today is Dr. Ron Cox, a native of Dubuque, Iowa, who grew up watching the Apollo missions to the moon and then pursued that passion as he headed off to the Iowa State University, where he received a bachelor's degree and PhD in aerospace engineering. His career began in the aerospace industry, and he eventually went on to spend time as an aerospace engineering professor and as a C-level executive. Ron currently runs Midwest Workforce Strategies, a consulting company that helps organizations understand Midwest workforce challenges and then designs plans to grow their labor force. Ron's presentation will cover some of his recent research on workforce strategies in the Midwest and how great organizations are winning the competition for talent. But before we hear from Ron, we want to hear from all of you to get a better idea of what workforce solutions you are considering in the next year. You're going to see a poll question come up on your screen, and if you don't mind, please check all that apply. We're getting that to pull up here. All right, you should see the poll question. Okay, we're going to give a couple more minutes here or seconds to see if we can get everyone's response. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for participating in the poll. Ron, if you could turn your camera on, thank you. Before we get started, I'm just curious what your insights are here. Is this what you have seen?
Well, actually, it's very close to what the data suggests is your biggest opportunities. First, keep in mind, this is a subset. There's about 30 different groups of people you could target. And so this is about 20% of those. But within this group, retention is by far the largest. Automation and part-time are kind of in a second tier. And individuals 65 and over and apprenticeship programs are much, much smaller. The data on remote workers, we'll figure that out in the future. That's still very hard to decipher what's going on with remote work, other than there's a lot of it.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron. I'm going to now turn things over to Ron as he shares his research and findings on workforce trends in Iowa and the Midwest. Just a quick reminder, if you have any questions that you would like Ron to address today, please use the chat and we will be watching for those. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Ron Cox.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen and we'll get going. Okay, we're going to try to get a Delta Dental smile out of as many of you as we can. We're going to go to the movies today. I have a lot of data. And I don't want to bore you with too much data without having some fun. If you're not familiar with this movie, The Matrix, it's an alien movie, and like all alien movies, some alien is going to rip your heart out and eat it. But it's no different than a romantic comedy, I say, because Reese Witherspoon's heart will be ripped out as well. And I will kind of rip out your workforce heart a little bit today, because this is a tough, tough problem. But you don't go to the movies to be depressed. You go to movies to have a good time. So I will show you in the end that you can solve your workforce problems and where to look for employees. And with that, so here's a preview of the movie. We're going to do a workforce flashback to a story I told across the state coming out of COVID. We're going to do a little myth busting that still going on. In all good alien films, something must die, and we have to, we'll discuss that. We're going to look at the new workforce norm, and scene 5, failure is not an option. Okay, scene 1, the trigger. In the movie, The Matrix, Morpheus says, Neo, I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You have to step through it. It is a company's job to decide, are you going to find people or not? And you have to take the initiative. This movie is kind of based on the Gartner hype cycle. If you're not familiar with that, it's when technology is released. It goes through peaks and valleys of disillusionment and excitement, and then things level out. There's always a trigger, the release of the technology. In the workforce hype cycle, COVID was kind of a pre-trigger. A lot of people were laid off, went to part-time work, and we expected a normal recession, that when the recession was over, people would come back, but they didn't. And so the real trigger was when companies said, oh my goodness, what's going on? And typically that was a lot of companies saying something's broken somewhere else. And that was the trigger of what's going on. But it turns out this trigger happened long ago. At the height of the Vietnam War, it was an industry survey done across Iowa, and workforce was the #1 problem 50 years ago. So as I started to write this story, I decided to dedicate it to my first mentor in the aerospace industry, who told me, Ron, when you design a wing, all the books are going to say one thing, but you need to turn 90 degrees, and you're going to see something on that wing that's going to make you a better fighter aircraft designer. And we're not going to blow everything up, but you need to look at things differently. And I'm going to ask you to look at workforce in a very different way today. Okay, so introduce the story. It was the best of time. We're coming back out of COVID. People were getting their vaccinations, and job openings were at a record high. The economy was booming, and it was the worst of times. This is a chart showing the growth of the population in the Midwest. It's been growing year after year after year, except we shrunk in a World War I and World War II and the farm crisis of the 80s. And again today, we are at World War kind of levels of negative population growth. Though small, the trend is clear. And it really was the worst of times. Across the state, we're hiring signs wherever. Where in every kind of industry. So, as the Lion King, it was said, you can learn from the past or you can run from it. Let's look at a little past. This surprises a lot of people. In 1950, Iowa, Minnesota, and Florida were the same size, about 250,000, 2.5 million population. So what happened? Florida is now over 7 times as big as Iowa. Minnesota, twice as big. These things don't happen in a whim. Technology helped bend the curve in Florida. Florida went from the land of mosquitoes to the land of mice because you could stand to live there. And they have been growing and growing since. But they didn't just leave well enough alone. They created a new space industry and a tourism industry and a retirement industry. And if you look across the United States, all 50 states, in the last 50 years, you can see Iowa, the 5th slowest growing state. Minnesota is the best in this 12 Midwest region, and everyone else is growing at a very slow pace. So there is a villain to this movie, the external thing that is keeping you from attracting workers to your company. But I have found in a lot of companies, there's an internal villain, just like in the movie The Matrix, that you are doing things possibly that are keeping you from getting new employees. So you have to address internal issues as well. So what's going on with the labor force? We're going to look real rapidly at these 4 things. We have slow population growth. The rest are the 38 states out of the 12 Midwest states. And you can see that the Midwest has been growing at a much slower pace. Why? What's the problem with population? 2 things. We'll get to babies later. First, immigration. immigration has been declining since the 90s. And that has led to parts of our problems. In addition to immigration going down, migration out of the Midwest has exacerbated things. The second issue, we have a very high labor force participation rate in Iowa. The Midwest is really quite good at getting people to work. Now, I call it a problem. It's a problem that is keeping you from finding workers because so many are already working. The third thing that's happening is the Midwest has just low unemployment. For 3 decades running, Iowa is the 4th best state in terms of low unemployment. So again, very few people left to get to work. And the fourth issue, what happened? This is how much better we are at pulling people into the workforce from the rest of the country. And we have done a great job of pulling women into the workforce over the last decades. Farmers that have lost their farms or took on second jobs, or their spouse took on another job, they came into the workforce, and it hid a lot of the Midwest workforce problems. And here's the result. Employment since 2008, the Midwest is a couple percent higher than where we were in 15 years ago. And the rest of the country is closer to 12 or 13% higher. So let's look at the future. Goes to the future, I fear you, more than any specter I have seen. It's hard to predict the future. So the best we can do is look at data from the past. And this is how fast the counties across the Midwest have been growing. Orange and white are bad. You're shrinking or staying the same. Green is growing, and you can see Florida and how fast they're growing. Rural areas have been taking a hit. And it gets worse, though. I told you we'd get back to babies. It gets a lot worse. This is the number of births in the United States since 1950 and the number of deaths. If you look at the top, we make 4 million babies a year in the United States. Coming out of World War II, we made 4 million babies a year, and now we're making about 4 million babies. But in here, something happened. We only had 3 million babies a year in the United States. We had 6 recessions in a very short period, the Vietnam War, birth control, more women going to college, more men going to college, more women entering the workforce, and birth rates declined. If you're not familiar with population pyramids, they go from the bottom, you're born at the bottom, you die at the top. One side is female, one side is male. And you can always tell the neck is fatter on the female side because women live longer. And what happens is you move up with time. So what's happening? The fertility rate in the United States peaked in the baby boomer times, 1957, and you add 65 years to there, that's right now. So those boomers, we all know it, are leaving the workforce. And so the boomers, as they leave, you have this necking down of fewer 40 to 55-year-olds in the workforce today. Fewer people to take over the jobs that the boomers have. That's part of the problem. Starting in 2007, expected births per woman, the fertility rate, started declining again. And when you add 16, 18, 20 years to that, those newborns, that's coming to right now. And so what's happening now? The population pyramid is shrinking down. So we not only have boomers being replaced with a smaller number of people, the lower number of births is declining. The only way you can change the US population pyramid is through immigration. Or net migration. Somebody has to come in to change the shape. Otherwise, you just proceed up as people get older. Here's Iowa's, and it looks very similar. So in here, the number 1, the neck, women are on the left, men are on the right. Then 2 are the boomers. 3 is this reduction of potential employees. And 4, the declining number of youth. So that's a bleak picture. I can't make it any prettier. So what are we going to do? Okay, in the movie The Matrix, Trinity says, no one's ever done anything like this. And Neo replied, that's why it's going to work. You've got to try something new if what you're doing isn't working. So I'm going to ask you to look and turn 90 degrees at workforce and take an entirely different perspective, possibly, than what you've been doing. Okay. Here's what's not the solution. Everybody chasing a very small unemployment number in the US. here's what I say is the solution. There are 5 groups of people that I suggest you should be going after. There are still a significant number of people that are not employed. There are people employed elsewhere that could be working for you. There's retaining the employees you have. There's getting more out of the employees that you currently have, and then looking at the workforce of the future. And it's a really tough problem. People are nonlinear, interconnected. This is a very complex problem. If it wasn't, we'd all have plenty of workers. And so what do? I look at how we design other complex systems. And this is where my aerospace engineering background came into play. I know we know how to design the best fighters in the world. They're very complex, nonlinear, interconnected. Why can't we use that methodology to solve our workforce problems? So what you do on a fighter aircraft, you break it into hundreds of components and you study it, each one individually, to see how it affects the whole plane. And that's what I did with workforce. I broke people into roughly 35 different kinds of people. And you bring in data to look at how much potential there is to hire these different kinds of people. And you see the categories: employee output, retention, non-employed, employed elsewhere, and the future employees. And here's how the basic principle works. We download data from thousands of counties across the US. And in this case, here's a curve of the Midwest, 1,100 counties, of the percent of 65 to 74-year-olds that are working. So here's this county in Michigan that only 1 out of 8, that age group, are working. But here's this county in Kansas that half of the 8 are working. So what can we learn from the counties to the far right on this graph? How are you able to get those kind of individuals to work versus the counties on the far left? And that gives us the potential of hiring more 65 to 74-year-olds. There are 30 of these graphs, one for each kind of people, and it tells you that the potential is different depending upon what you're looking at. And what I call this is the workforce vector. It tells you if you go looking here for people, they're going to have these characteristics, and there might not be very many. But over here, there's a lot more, and they look different. So here's the process. It's a 4-step process. 1, self-assessment. How are you currently doing in hiring people? And then 2nd, create your vision for workforce. As a company executive, you may have a vision for your company, but do you have a vision for your workforce? What are you trying to achieve? 2nd, strategy. There's a number of steps here. This is the workforce vector. It tells you where the potential number of people are. You have to look at this. You have to look at your competitors. Who are they going after? And you then need to decide who are you going to target to hire into your company. The 3rd step is operational excellence. It doesn't matter what system you have for being a great company, as long as you're sticking to it and implementing it. You have to embed into your system this new approach of finding people. And here's where the matrix comes in. These people are different. There are 35 different kinds of individuals, and there are 20 plus different things that are keeping them out of the workforce, but they're not all the same. For instance, if you're trying to hire an individual with a disability, certain of these root causes are impacting their ability to work for you. And if they're not addressed, you are not going to be successful hiring people with a disability. For example, here, transportation is an issue. If your community or if your company isn't part of the transportation solution, you may not succeed at hiring individuals with a disability. And each kind of person has different root causes keeping them out of the workforce. Some of these cross many types of people, others very few. For instance, project selection scope, number 15, it only impacts a few of the 35-ish kinds of people, but something like wages and benefits impacts almost all of them. And that's why we're here today. Delta Dental and Benefits is part of the solution for attracting people to your company. And the last step is target marketing. And this is my favorite example of a company. This was a newspaper clipping from several years ago. The dollars per hour are going to be more. Do you know how to speak English? Not a problem. We'll pay you while you take classes. Do you know how to do the job? No, not a problem. We'll train you and pay you. Do you have to pray in the middle of the work day? Well, we're going to put prayer rooms in. Does your religion make you have to wash your hands, face, and feet? We're going to put foot washing stations in. So look at how aggressive. They found a target audience that was underemployed. They figured out why they weren't employed. They addressed those root causes, and then they marketed to those individuals. So in the end, coming out of COVID, there were two options, like in the Morpheus, or like in the Matrix. Take the blue pill, just keep doing what you're doing and hope for the best, or take the red pill and decide to change and turn 90 degrees. Okay, scene 2. There's an old saying on earth, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We still have people trying to do what we've done in the past, looking for simple fixes. There are no more simple fixes. So let's bust a few myths. So we're at this peak. There's still people. We can get these people back. It's just lazy millennials. Make up your favorite line of what the problem is. There's numerous. We don't have time today, but let's look at a couple of finger pointing and quick fixes. We'll cut taxes. Taxes will bring people here. There's a lot of states that have no income taxes, but guess what? They pay lots of other taxes in those states. So Texas and Washington, I've lived in both of those states, zero income tax, but boy, they get it from you some other ways. So you see that Texas and Washington, even though they're booming economies, taxes aren't what's doing it. Other things are. And you look at a wide range of tax rates in the Midwest. Iowa is the green arrow toward the bottom, a higher rate of tax. But taxes, are they part of it? Yes, but probably a very small part. Another thing people have been looking at is we need to hire more 14 to 15-year-olds. These are the states that have tried to change or have succeeded in changing legislation in the last 2 years to make it easier to hire or to put into different jobs 14 and 15-year-olds. Nothing in the West, one state in the South, 2 in the Northeast, and over half of the Midwest states. This is kind of grasping at straws. If you look at the math, and it's hard to do, the math is easy, it's 14-year-old math, but it's hard to get the data because there's very little research on 14 and 15-year-olds working. But my best estimate is for every 300 people working, at best, one is a 14 or 15-year-old. So might we get that number to 1.1 or 1.2? Yes, but it is not going to get anywhere near solving any Midwest workforce problems. Okay, scene 3, something must die. In the workforce hype cycle, at some point, we had all this hope, but it's disillusionment. And there are 3 places to go. Absolutely down, out of business, kind of stay, keep doing what you're doing, or to grow. And we'll do growth in the next scene. So in the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, it's during the Black Plague, and they say, bring out your dead, and they haul out this guy who's not dead. I'm not dead yet. Well, he will be very soon. Can you take him anyway? Goes the joke. There are places that are not dead yet, but they will be. And it's not just communities, it's parts of industries or companies. Here's an example of how powerful changing the employment picture is. There are close to 10,000 cities, towns, metropolitan areas in the Midwest. And I took 2 out of each of the 12 Midwest states. So you've got 12 Midwest cities, 1 from each state in the pilot, 12 in the co-pilot, and the thousands of others in the passengers. So in the pilot in Iowa is Des Moines, and the co-pilot is Cedar Rapids. And if you look in the Midwest, all these other cities at best are staying flat. If somebody's growing, somebody's shrinking. And this is over 55% roughly of the people are in these 2 driver communities. Because not just because of the size of those communities, because people are driving in. So it makes workforce much more difficult if you're not in those key areas. So which communities are going down? It's hard to predict the future, but there is a USDA correlation that says the more you have in row crops, the faster people leave your county, and the more you have in forests and lakes, the least that likely they leave, and you can even attract people. Retirees are moving to places that are attractive. Now they are not a workforce, but they're spending money and they're helping create an economy. And companies have told me they are looking very closely at branch plants. And if they don't see a potential labor pool, they're going to expand in other communities and shrink in the communities where they can't find labor. It's going to affect different industries, and not the whole industry, but different jobs. If you're in a low wage sector, janitorial, or maybe CNAs in hospital, waitresses in restaurants, hotels, it is very difficult. These are competing at the lower wage structure, and the higher people pay wages in other industries like manufacturing, construction, it just makes it tougher on these sectors. Some of these companies are going to struggle and may go out of business. Okay, so what else is going on with the people that are in this dilutionist trough? In the movie Groundhog Day, what did Bill Murray do? The same thing, day after day. And that's what some companies are doing. We put out, we're hiring signs at COVID. We just need to put more words on the signs. We're going to make the signage permanent, right? You've got signs that are permanently on the side of a building because companies are constantly looking for people. Marketing, marketing, marketing. People are trying to get people to move to their state from somewhere else. It's a zero-sum game. I'm stealing from another state if I'm able to get somebody to move to yours. Free employees. McDonald's is my poster child of getting you to do their work because they're having so much trouble finding employees. And what's the net result? If you look now, employment in Iowa, green. If you look at the orange arrow, we are not at where we were before COVID, and we have started in the last couple of months heading down. The Midwest is basically just now getting back to where we were 5 years ago. The rest of the country is growing slightly, and you can see some of these gangbuster states like Texas, how fast they're growing employment. Okay, scene 4. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. So some companies are up this slope. They've turned 90 degrees, early adopters. They know this isn't going away, and they're strategizing. And workforce is a key strategy in the company. Busy chart, don't have time to go into it, but what this shows is that coming out of the COVID recession, the curve that goes to the far right, red and blue, we did not come back to the bee's hive of where the economy spins around. But layoffs and discharges remained low, which indicates that, and companies have told me this, they're holding on to their people. In past times, they would have let them go, but they're holding on to them because they don't know if they'll be able to find people if they let them go. And the cost of bringing in new people and retraining them is so high. This has exacerbated the workforce problem because as the economy slows down naturally, you would expect to see more people out looking for jobs. But if people are hoarding them, it's not happening. Part-time employees, people that get it know that a significant portion of the people working only want part-time jobs for various reasons. And if the part-time employees aren't part of your solution, you should look at it. Training, companies that are moving up this curve get that they're not going to find people with the skills they need, and training is going to be part of their responsibility. 55 plus employees, it's a quarter of everybody working. And the boomers are, some of them are staying on longer, and companies are adapting and figuring out how do I keep someone from retiring by changing their job that satisfies more some of their needs. And if you look, this is one of my favorite charts. This is the number of females not working ratioed to the number of men not working. So in 1960, there were 20 women not working for every one man. And today it's 2 to 1. So even though we have a very high labor force participation rate in Iowa, if you look at who's not working, there's still roughly, 2 women not working for every 1 man. So you should be looking at things like that. Okay, Houston, we have a problem. We're not going to solve this workforce problem easily in Iowa, and it looks like we're going to have this problem for 20 more years minimum. if not beyond that, based on demographics. But failure is not an option. You want to grow your company, you can. You're going to take employees away from others. You're going to take employees from the pool of people not working. This is the long haul in the workforce hype cycle. It's where we're at going forward until we have another recession where tons of people are released. This is what we've got. And even if we have a recession, when the recession's over, we're going to have the same situation. So anything you do now will pay you benefits into the future. So there's two options. The blue pill. If you want your standard of living to increase and you're going to keep doing what you're doing, then we need population growth in the world. 1 billion more people and 1 billion more and 1 billion more. So you can keep doing exactly what you're doing and sell it to another billion people. But all the data suggests the world population growth is slowing down. The US is slowing down as well, and the Midwest even more so. So if we want our standard of living to increase, then you're going to have to change. You're going to have to turn 90 degrees. The workforce vector tells you where you can find people. And if you've done everything you think you can and you just can't find people, I will say you can still improve, you can still be more profitable, you can still grow, but you're going to have to look at some other things. So let's just focus real fast on a few of these: innovation, continuous improvement, and immigration. Okay, in the Matrix, they say never send a human to do a machine's job. A lot of talk about AI and things out there. This is an IBM. IBM just released this earlier this year, thinking they can get rid of almost 8,000 people by AI. A lot of these HR jobs. I talked to another company. They think they can get rid of a lot of lawyers negotiating contracts that are fairly standard. There are many people talking. There's a lot of hype. Where it's going to fall out, we'll see. But artificial intelligence, robotics, automated systems are part of the future if you want to grow and you can't find people. It has to be part of the solution. Okay, we all have a natural instinct to keep doing what we're doing. It's natural. So it's hard to change. If you look at the United States, we had the best assembly lines in the world in the early 1900s. Now, we dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. But how is it Japan so rapidly has the highest rated cars in the US? It's because of unrelenting, continuous improvement, lean, call it what you want, constantly getting more. Their population pyramid is upside down. They need to get more from the people they have because they don't have enough people. And it can be done. What's an immigrant? Someone not from Maine. I told you Japan's population pyramid's upside down. Part of it is because of birth rates, but part of it you can see their low net migration. US has been a mecca for people since the 1700s, right? People want to be in the US, and it's allowed the US businesses to keep growing because in not just childbirth, more children, but people coming in from other countries. But they're not coming to the Midwest like they used to. In the 1800s, the Midwest was the destination of the foreign-born population. Immigrants came for farmland. We gave all the farmland away. Immigrants are by and large going to the West and South. So despite immigration being down, there's still those that are coming aren't coming to the Midwest the way they did in the 1800s. So this is something we can change potentially ourselves if we can't find people other ways. Okay, we'll close this down. In the Matrix, he says, I don't know the future, right? No one does. And I didn't come here to tell you how it's going to end, but I can tell you based on the hundreds of companies I've talked to and seen, I have seen companies in 1 hour change what they're doing and immediately find people. It works because we're all constrained. We all are busy doing things, but it turns out there's always opportunities. And I know you can find new people because I've seen it happen in many companies. So I showed you this case of this company that had prayer rooms in. This was a recent newspaper article, the company's Anderson Corporation in Minnesota. Not only did they do that, there's a large Somali population in Minneapolis, and I sense they observed that they were underemployed, and they took kind of the workforce vector approach, even though they didn't know what it was. This was something they've started years ago. But they've just recently had this article that they realized were these a deaf population that they could recruit them. So they've now started going to recruiting fairs and things and putting in the technology so that they're living kind of what I've been preaching about the workforce vector. There are people out there that are looking for a job. It's different numbers in different categories of people. You have to solve the root cause that's affecting them and keeping them from coming to work for you. And after you do that, then you market to them and say, come work for me because I'm addressing what it is you need. So the question to the crowd is, are you ready to turn 90 degrees and look at workforce in a different way? To get a hold of me, you can send me an email. Happy to chat with anybody. Thanks to Delta Dental for having me today. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I have different white papers and such I put up. And with that, I'll stop sharing and we'll get to the Q&A time.
Ron, thank you so much. You have certainly shared a lot of very interesting trends today and given us all a lot of things to think about. And what I'd like to do with the rest of our time is to discuss what organizations can do to overcome some of these challenges and how we can think differently when approaching employee recruitment and retention. I'll tell a little story that, Delta Dental's executive team and board have all heard an expanded version of this presentation. And one of the things that has been clear in our internal discussions is that this is not just an HR issue. We recognize it takes the entire organization from the top down to take a look. And so I'm going to start with a question, and then we'll turn to our chat too to see if we have additional questions there. But for a company that is looking to take action today, what are the steps that they should take?
So I've given this presentation to boards of directors, CEO, executive teams, lots of different people, conferences and such. And I can tell you maybe 1 out of 5 are able to go down this path, forcefully down the path. And I would say the number one thing that's limiting them is they're unwilling to really turn 90 degrees, to dramatically change and rethink workforce. Companies, CEOs, presidents are involved in visioning for the company. But how many companies have a workforce vision? To me, that has to be a key part of your strategic plan. That means your executive team needs to be involved. So you need to know where you're headed to. You know what your workforce situation is today, but just like lean, there's your current state and your future state. What do you want things to look like? Define it, then develop the strategies, whatever they are, and then stick to it. That operational excellence and not letting go. This problem is not going away. The demographics kind of scream that. And you've got to stick to it. Most companies start with marketing. We just need to market more. We need more billboards. We need more online advertising. That's what everybody's doing. To me, that's not strategic. It's doing the same thing you've been doing before, just in more volume. So start with the vision. That's what I would suggest to anybody.
Very good. Well, you've also mentioned to me in a couple of times today that a lot of times leaders do go directly to that marketing message when they're looking to recruit. And as you shared with us, it's not just an HR problem or a marketing problem. It's larger than that. And I know we have quite a few HR leaders with us today on this call. And I'm curious, what advice would you give them on engaging their broader teams and their executive leadership as they walk this path of really looking at their workforce vision?
Well, I think it's key to understand this is a very complex problem. he needs long-term thinking. And no one in isolation can easily solve a very complex problem. You know, the fighter example I give, thousands of engineers. It's really complex. And so is this. If your executive team isn't engaged, just HR in isolation trying to solve this. HR by definition tends to be very operational. By nature, it has to. You're hiring tons of people and onboarding them and et cetera, et cetera. It needs to become strategic. An example I gave, I had an HR person see this and they asked me, would you come speak to our executive team? Because my boss doesn't believe, they think it's just an HR problem. Now, this was just coming out of COVID. And after the executive team saw the data and saw kind of how things were, the CEO said to me, wow, I think I've kind of been blaming HR, and I can see now it's not always HR. Maybe we need to think differently. One of my favorite examples is a company had me present to their engineers, and I said, what did the engineers design any things? Yes, beyond the management team, because they feel there's going to be a shortage of people doing warranty work, installing products, helping with products, and they want their products designed in the future for fewer people manufacturing them, fewer people installing, fewer people fixing warranty work, etc. So they're trying to change the thought process, not just in the C-level executives, but down into the whole company. That's far beyond HR. It's like lean. If you do lean in a company, it's not, you know, it should be everybody, top to bottom, involved in that process. And workforce is getting near that top to bottom approach we're going to need.
Makes great sense. There's definitely a responsibility for all of us throughout the organization to bring great people into the organization. So I do have a question that I'm seeing here on the chat. So I'm going to move to that for a second. And, you know, I know that here I'm going to kind of preface it a little bit, is that, you know, trends tend to happen on the coast and then typically come to Iowa. So I'm curious, or to the Midwest. What the question is what workforce trends are you seeing across the country? You know, we've talked about Midwest Iowa today. Is Iowa having any different challenges?
So my company Midwest, I'm really focusing on the Midwest, but I was just asked 2 weeks ago to speak to a national audience. And people there were from Arizona, Texas, Florida, New York. They were all having workforce problems. So first of all, Iowa is not that different. Even in states that are growing rapidly. I'll give you an example. If you look at Phoenix, Arizona, it has grown by 1 million people in the last 10 years. That's a third of Iowa. Can you imagine if Iowa gained 1 million people in the last 10 years? That's how many people Phoenix, and they can't find people. Industry is growing where the people are, so the people problems exist because population is an issue and the economy is doing well. So what do we see different in the Midwest? The Midwest and the Northeast actually are very similar. We tend to out-migrate people. So not only is our fertility rates down across, leave the Midwest heading somewhere else, that makes it worse. So Iowa and the Midwest are different from the South and West in the fact we're losing people to those areas. We have a lot of rural areas, and across the country, rural areas have been getting hit hard. So if you're a business in rural Iowa, rural Nebraska, rural South Dakota, you're going to be hit harder. People are looking to live in diverse economies because there's diversity of people, thoughts, restaurants, things to do, and diversity of companies. If I live in a small town, I might not be able to find other employment if I don't want to work. If I live in a large town, I have got a lot of options. So it turns out nationally, migration has been on the downslide for decades, and which means it's going to get harder to pull people back. So long-winded answer, Iowa The Midwest is different in that we have not a lot of people left because of slow population. We have very high labor force participation rates, low unemployment. That makes it worse. Outmigration makes it worse. If you're in a rural area, it makes it worse. It's a lot of negatives, but I guarantee you, I've seen companies in rural areas find more people. So we're not that different. Everybody has these same issues, just in different percents.
Absolutely. All right, well, we do have about 10 more minutes here, so I want to I want to take us down another path here of, you know, after we had our discussions here at Delta Dental, we recently implemented a job sharing position. So we were having a hard time filling it and tried to think about different ways that we could do that. I'm curious what advice you have for employers as they're looking to recruit employees from traditionally different candidate pools than they have in the past. You know, we know COVID has changed some things from a hybrid perspective. I'm curious what you're seeing as you're out talking to other employers.
So I also saw something come up in the chat, which was similar to that. Maybe you were just paraphrasing what that was, but it's how do you get to these root causes? I would say the number one thing to do is to focus. We're hiring sign says everybody's the same and come here no matter who you are, what you are, where you are, etc. We have hired all the easy people. What's left, it's going to be harder. So focus on something. If you looked at the Anderson Corporation example, I don't know what they're doing internally, but in terms of their press releases, many years ago, they started after what appears to be the Somalia Muslim population. And then they started down this deaf. So they might be doing 2 or 3 others, but clearly, I mean, it's hard to do 20 kinds of people at once. So if you pick 2 or 3 and focus, or 5. So how do you find the root causes? Each one of these, what I do is I do an exhaustive literature search to find out what it is. So for each one of those 30 plus, I know what they are. So you can Google this, you can call me. I hold presentations at conferences, and then I hold workshops at the conferences and step people. I give them the root cause matrix, and so they can step through and they leave with a plan. But I would caution you, be careful of the research that are blogs and things. There's a lot of opinions out there of what you need to do. You really need to look at, if you're going to hire people with a disability, there are experts in the field that know far more than me. I know what the primary root causes are. Experts in the field know much more granularly, but in your community, it's different. So you might have transportation systems in your community. So even though that is a root cause of keeping people with a disability from working, you may not have that problem in your community. So you have to look at the root causes for who you're targeting. Then you have to do your community and company assessment and look at the gap and fill the gaps.
Very good. Well, we can't have a conversation on workforce and not talk about AI. So, you know, we're hearing a lot about AI, and some good, some we may not feel so good about. Can you share some examples of how companies are using AI to address their workforce?
I can probably give you more anecdotal. Companies are in this now, just like the AI companies are in this now. We talked about the workforce hype cycle. There's a lot of AI hype cycle going on. Now, is it going to play out? Yes, it's going to end up somewhere. The examples that are out there, I had some in my presentation, right? I used OpenAI to create some of the graphics that are in my presentation. And as opposed to hiring a graphic artist or me stumbling around for 20 or 30 hours trying to draw some picture. AI did it in about 30 seconds. Now, some of what it produced was terrible, but some of it was quite good and better than anything I could do. So AI is no different than robotics or different than a flush toilet. Civilization gets better. Our standard of living increases by new technologies. This has been happening for thousands of years. people come up with better ideas, and it will impact workforce. Some people will lose their jobs, and other jobs will be created. This is true with anything. The question shouldn't be, are we gonna, if somebody loses their job, it's potential new employees for you. The question is, what are you doing with AI to help deal with some of your workforce shortages? Are you using it to help your people become more productive?
Very good. Well, we have time for one more question here, and so I'm going to ask this one. If someone on the webinar is wondering, how do I get Ron to come in and talk with my broader team, hear about your entire presentation, because I know this was a condensed from a timing perspective. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you and hold a conversation about what might be the best opportunity for their organization?
So I threw my email up before. Best thing to do, email me. We can have a short conversation. I prefer to work in groups. So if you're a hospital association or a manufacturing association, whatever, because I'm trying to reach as many people as possible with the message and how to step through this. If I work with a company, I will only work with the entire executive team. I prefer to work with the board of directors if it's there too, because if everybody's not on the same page, it's going to fail, which means you're wasting my time and your time. So this is going to require a shift. You're going to have to turn 90 degrees as an executive team, and that's the best way to do it. But I would suggest the easy way to do it is this is being recorded. Show it to your executive team or portions. If it doesn't resonate, I wouldn't go any farther. But keep thinking to the future. Get a workforce vision would be my number one mantra of where you need to start.
Well, very good. First of all, Ron, thank you. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day and spending it with us here on the Green Room. As always, your insights are so enlightening. And then I want to thank all of you on the webinar for attending today's Green Room with our special guest, Dr. Ron Cox. We will be sending a recording of today's presentation for your reference. So thank you again, and we look forward to hosting you again in 2024 for the next Green Room. Goodbye, everyone.